The issue that's taken a lot of attention recently is trade negotiations with the U.S., now the USMCA agreement. For a look at what can be learned more broadly from that experience, I spoke with Speer, a former advisor to the Harper government and now a senior fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs and the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. First, I want to ask you about the recent trade negotiations. And if we look back on that process now, what lessons do you think Canada and the Trudeau team should take from the process itself?
Well, I think to step back, the big takeaway is that the United States, under Mr. Trump, but the truth is, I think, under any president, starting really with President Obama, who first recognized the extent to which the global landscape was changing, and the United States was going to have to think about the way it wields power, the way it exerts its influences, or its interests rather, differently. That really culminated in the free trade negotiations, where previous presidents may have been prepared to accept economic imbalances in the name of regional stability or regional relationships. And in this case, the Trump administration was driven by raw national interest. The view that the NAFTA was not serving the interests of enough of the U.S. economy, and they went about in a singularly minded way to secure a deal that better serves American interests, even if that's done at the expense of Canada or Mexico. And I think it's fair to say that the deal that the administration ultimately got is marginally better for the United States than NAFTA. But the bigger picture, as you say, is not just on this deal. It's that I think we'll be living in a world where the Trump administration and future U.S. administrations wield influence differently and pursue national self-interest differently. And it'll be up to the Trudeau government and subsequent Canadian governments to reconcile that in the way that we do Canadian foreign policy.
But it's not just the Canada-U.S. relationship that you're talking about here, because I know you've written about recalibrating the post-war international arrangement. What does that actually mean from your point of view?
Well, American scholar Robert Kagan describes the current international architecture as the world that America made. This was after World War II, when at Bretton Woods we saw the creation of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the United Nations, of course, the Marshall Plan. The Americans took on a significant role in the world, in part driven by Cold War considerations, but also a view that the stability, the promotion of democracy, the promotion of market economics was good for the greater global interests. And I think the truth is the world that America has made has served the globe well. We've seen enormous strides on global poverty and so on. But we've also observed, Alison, real economic convergence between the United States and elsewhere. In 1960, American GDP represented 40% of the global economy. Today, it's about half of that, and by all accounts, it's going to continue to fall. And so if you think about it this way, the world that America made has essentially worked. And I think there's an expectation increasingly on the parts of the Americans. As I say, this is not unique to Mr. Trump. He's doing it in a particular Trumpian way. But I think it even starts back with Mr. Obama, an expectation that America's role in the world was going to change, and that expectations on others were similarly going to change. And I think what successive Canadian governments have struggled to understand is what that means for us, given our proximity to the United States, given our reliance on the American marketplace, and given our reliance on the United States on issues of security and defense. The world that America made is changing, and Canadian foreign policy and the way we think about Canadian foreign policy is going to have to change accordingly.
So if you were advising this particular government, and I know you were critical at some point of the Trudeau team, for example, suggesting they were too provocative with the United States in this trade negotiation, but if you look beyond that, how would you suggest they approach the broader foreign policy, given that we are a so-called middle power?
I'd say two things. The first is to look for ways in which we can partner with the United States on issues of mutual interest. And a big one for me is China. Many of the concerns that the American government has with China, whether it's the imbalance of the economic relationship or whether it's matters of national and global security or even corporate espionage, these are interests that we share with them. And I think there's an opportunity for the Trudeau government both to advance Canadian interests vis-a-vis China, but in so doing, work constructively with this administration. The second, of course, is I think to look for ways in which Canada is uniquely positioned to make a global contribution. In a world of scarce resources, and as you say, middle power status, we're not going to be able to achieve everything. We're going to have to find unique ways to make a contribution. Just one concrete example. Here in Toronto, where I am, Canada has a comparative advantage when it comes to autism research. We have some of the globe's most impressive and advanced researchers on matters of autism. I think that's something we should bet on, not just because it will serve Canadian interests, Canadian health and socioeconomic interests and so on, but it's also a way for us to contribute to a global problem. I think that's the way we're going to have to go about contributing to the global economy, the global community, and at the same time advancing Canada's interests.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate your perspective.
Thanks for having me on the program tonight.